myself. Okay, good evening. Dumisani would say good morning because you're supposed to have some fire in your bones. So, all right. Seventh session, we are going to do a little recap so that we can bring ourselves up to speed and then take to the seventh one. And it always bears repetition. During any one session, I say so many things. Who's going to remember all that? So it's good to revise and come over and over again. So here goes the recap of the previous sessions. First of all, we are describing an intellectual journey. This is not a set of lectures. It's a set of a description of a very personal journey of mine, which is an intellectual journey. The intellectual journey requires critical thinking. So we'll repeat what the meaning of critical thinking is. Critical thinking is when you do not swallow just what you hear, nor do you dismiss, but you inquire. Because if you swallow it, then you're not sure whether it was really true or credible. And if you dismiss, ignorance is dismissing what you did not know. Ultimate ignorance is doing away with what you didn't even know about. Don't do that. So neither do you swallow blindly, nor do you dismiss. But you do critical thinking, meaning you inquire honestly. Why? Because we have three attitudes in our minds. The attitude of believer, number two, attitude of a skeptic, and three, attitude of an inquirer. And all of us have all three. But here the challenge is don't inquire as a believer, don't inquire as a skeptic, inquire as an inquirer. Because if you inquire as a believer, you look only for those things that will settle your belief. And if you inquire as a skeptic, then you'll only look for those things that will knock the point off and you're quite pleased with yourself. But really, that's not inquiry. Inquiry is when you become a neutral inquirer. And to keep that inquiring atmosphere, we have four things: humility, honesty, calmness, respect. This doesn't apply only to our discussion. It applies to anything actually in life. Just check it out and you will see it does. Remember what, let's just make mention of one or two of those points. Humility is knowing how small you are. No matter how much you know, you still know only a little bit. So you'll always be humble. What is being humble? A teachable spirit. Saying, I don't know, on the places where you don't know. And looking for answers that somebody else will give you. You don't have to sit there and say, I know it all. That's being proud, and the proud is the exact opposite of a true seeker. Honesty, give credit where credit is due. And we called it the what factor? Wow. When something is impressing you, you have to say, wow. You don't have to say it loud so I can hear, but say it at least in your heart. Yeah, man, that was really good. And don't worry who gets the credit for that. Whether the opposing side gets it or you get it, doesn't matter. If it is impressive, you've got to say, wow. Calmness, don't get upset. There's no need to get upset if you are inquiring. Only if you are biased, you get upset because that fellow, hey, he said something that hit me. But when you're inquiring, there's nothing to hit. You're just looking for something. So the inquiring attitude does not allow you to get mad and angry. So I'm saying don't get angry, because if you get angry, then we're not going to have a dialogue. We're not going to have a conversation. To have a conversation, you have to be calm. Number four is respect. Always keep the dignity of the person up. Never try to pull it down, even if you disagree with the person. Keep the dignity up. That is respect. And then we said we'd look at the question of God's existence versus God's non-existence. Stand in the middle in the pan process. The pan process stands in the middle and looks at both. And when you look at both, you fight for both, two columns, and fight against both, another 2 columns, 4 columns. We did that the first evening, and we saw this as the conclusion. Based on evidence and reasonable logical thinking, the existence of the supernatural is valid and makes the better sense. Therefore, the existence of God is a rational, credible claim. It's not based on blind belief, it's based on evidence. The second night we asked about the theory of evolution. And I said that I believe in evolution, but not the theory of evolution. What is evolution? Change. There are changes. But the theory of evolution says those changes were so insistent and so solid and so continuous that one species changed to another and went through the whole classification of the biological realm, from species to genus to family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. Change, yes. Within a species, yes, you can make races and breeds and subspecies and varieties. But that has never been shown anything that goes beyond that. It never goes to another species. So we saw that when we put the theory of evolution against scientific criteria, it doesn't fit. It is not a scientific theory. That's why I believe in evolution, but not the theory of evolution. And we said that if the theory of evolution is scientific, then we can say we don't need God, because the process of natural selection was sufficient. Whereas if the theory of evolution is not scientific, then to explain what we have in the world and in the universe today, you do need something more than just natural selection. And the only thing left is the supernatural, meaning God. So that's where we came to on the screen. It says if the theory of evolution is not scientific, then the study of nature, natural laws, could endorse the claim that God does in fact exist. And the challenge from Socrates, quoted by Plato, we must go where the evidence leads. Then we are being reasonable individuals. Third night we did the question of relativism, which says that all statements on earth are only relatively true. And we saw that it was actually a self-defeating proposition. Because you have to use the word all. All statements are relative. The moment you say all statements, then it becomes an absolute truth. So relativism sits on an absolute truth and then wants to relativize everything else. That won't work because you're not being consistent. Then there is religious relativism known as pluralism. All the religions equal. They are valid, all of them. Don't say anything bad about any. There's good in every one of them, and we agree there is good in every one of them. But to say that all are equal, equally valid, equally true, that was the question. And when we looked at the writings, not a single one of the writings said that they were the way and the other was also an alternate way. No. Every religion, belief system claimed to be the only way. This led to a logical deduction from that. If two or three of each of them are saying it is the only way, then we logically deduced that if that's the case, and more than 2, 3, 4 of them are saying that they are the only way, then logically there can be only one that is telling the truth, that is the only way. And to try to examine that way, or to find that way, we checked out of the scene of doctrine, of philosophy, and tenets of belief, and we shifted to the story. The story is where we got the doctrines from. So what I call the para-religious factors, not the religious factors. I cannot compare the religious factors. I might be able to compare the para-religious factors. So we started doing that, and what were we looking for? The red marble. I mean the one that is sticking out, the one that is different. So we are not saying that which is superior or better than any others. What we are saying is that if there is one of them that is different from the others, well, that's the color. That's the correct colored marble. So that is what we were doing. So we went on the next day looking for the red marble with number 1 question: what is the writing to be classified? And ancient writings are classified into 4. Folktale, legend, myth, historical. And when we compared the writings to this classification, we found that the New Testament is the best attested historical piece of literature of the ancient world. In fact, the whole of ancient world. To reject its historicity is to reject all of classical antiquity. It is so solidly historical. It's better than any writing of the ancient world, including all that we find as, historical, like Herodotus' history and Tacitus' annals and Josephus' Jewish wars and Caesar's Gallic wars. You put them all on the table, this book, the New Testament, will rise up as the best attested ancient literature, historical in type. Number two, is there anything in the writing that allows me to test it? And we found only the Judeo-Christian scriptures give you a test. So there itself is a red marble. And then when we looked at what the test was, it's called predictive prophecy. It fulfills its own test wonderfully and powerfully, clearly. In other words, anybody can see that it's fulfilling it. It's written here, fulfilled here. Well, it's done then. Do you remember the name of that scientist we mentioned? Anyone? I mean, it's a big, long name. You don't have to remember it. I'm just trying to... Yes? Simon, somebody said? Yes. Pere Simon Laplace. Yes, sir. He was looking for that intellect. And we identified Pere Simon Laplace's intellect. Good for you, sir. And once we identified that, we gave credit where credit was due. Yes, sir. So the Judeo-Christian scriptures fulfilled its own test very well. Then we asked for what is the top feature of the literature. Islam, the beauty. I mean, it is so beautiful that it can sway you. And we saw stories. And the story is so amazing that we had to say, wow. Same with the Hindu scriptures, it has deep philosophy in there. And the philosophy is so deep and it's so all-encompassing. It puts together not only philosophy, but mathematics and science and medicine and civics and everything together. It's very deep. This is what National Geographic said. Hindu sages gave to mankind one of the most sophisticated systems of philosophy ever devised by man. Buddhism, we said, was just vast. It is the vastest body of literature on earth. More than 470 volumes. So it comes to, more than 400,000 pages. And half of it has not yet been translated. We don't know. So it's huge. When you stand before that huge body, you have to say, wow, hey, I can't pass too many judgments on it. Judeo-Christian, the cross-referencing, meaning one author would write his stuff down and he'll say, the Lord gave, and then he would also say, the Lord gave that other author as well. So when you look at one author referencing another and claiming that the Lord gave him his and as well as his, then the natural deduction is that if the writing of the book was spread over 1400 years, then that source must have at least lived for that long to give everyone theirs. So that is amazing. So the conclusion of the top features is that all the top features are amazing and highly impressive. They all get excellent marks, no red marble in this study. But that doesn't mean we don't respect them all. We said wow to all of them. And then we left the writings and came to the flesh and blood founders and asked the first question, what's the highest claim you make for yourself? And tell me the highest claim you make for yourself. And when we saw the claims they made for themselves, it's very clear that Jesus made the highest claim. He was the Son of God. All the other claims were high, but they were still only in the human realm. Only his went up out there. I asked the question, I had to accept it. Some people say, oh, how can I know that? Well, how can you know any of the others either? So either you take all of them or dismiss all of them. So if you take all of them, well, then that's the highest. So we have to give credit where credit is due. That's a red marble too. Then we asked, what is your message and mission? And they all gave wonderful answers. But this man said, I'm not bringing you a message. I am the message. That's amazing for anyone to say, I am the message. Because no other founder ever said, I am the message. They said, I'm bringing you a message. But he said, I am the message. In one sense, it's consistent with him saying, I came from there. Because if I came from the other realm, I would have to bring the message with me, in me. If I'm here, then the person up there, whoever the God is, will have to give me a message, and then I'll bring. The sixth is the study of the life versus teachings. We found that his is the only life that was lived in conformity to his own teachings. Theory and practice met in only one life. And therefore, he's the only one who has the right to say, follow me. And then I said I turned around because everything was red marble is pointing this side. So I said, let me look for studies in which he would not come out first. And we did 3 of them. The first was birth stories. He didn't come out first. He was the worst birth. He was born among animals. Where would you like to be born? In a hospital at least, or at least at home. Who likes to be born in a cattle shed? But he was born there in a cattle shed. Really abject poverty. And not only that, we said that he was even the only founder who was conceived out of wedlock. Boy, how is that to start your life like that? And everyone look at you and this guy, he's questionable. There's a big question on his character. The second one of those is, what is the length of ministry? Muhammad's was 23 years, Moses was 40 years, Gautama Buddha was 45 years, and the Hindu sages went over generations, and this man, 3.5 years. Whoa, you have to ask a question. Why only 3.5 years? And we find that it's 3.5 years, not because he had an accident, or suddenly fell sick or something, had a heart attack or something. Nope. It was 3.5 years because he was hated by his own community with a passion and finally murdered. That's why 3.5 years. Now how can you call this fellow first? You have to place him last, least length of ministry. And then when you came to the death stories, all of them died honorable deaths. Everyone was respectful of the person who went. Everyone flew their flags at half-mast when they died. But when he came to his point of death, he died as a condemned criminal. With every indication that he was not to be followed at all. He was morally bankrupt. That's what the Jews showed. Sent him to the cross where he would hang. A person who hangs is cursed of God. And how can you follow him? But such an ending, when you look at what is there in the world today, how do you explain what's in the world if this is his ending? How can a criminal have such a following today? How can a criminal actually incite and encourage people to do huge good things in society? People who stays there the last is the group that's called by his name. Why would they do that? Just looking at a cross, naked body hanging there, and you get encouraged to do that? Of course not. So we asked ourselves the question last evening. Something happened. That is why there is anything known as Christianity. So we come to the question of the post-death scene. What happened after death? So let's stretch out. Okay, let's get to the topic. What happened after death to all these founders? The Hindu, there was cremation, that's how they usually ended. Mourning, and sometimes there's also feasting, and that's part of the ceremony. And they take the ashes and sometimes throw it into the river Ganga, it is called, the most holy river in India, signifying that this person has now merged with the eternal. And then you make some shrines and memorials. And then what happens? Your stuff that you wrote out so carefully, somebody else picks up. So you go, somebody else comes. In Buddhism, for some days they worship the relics with utmost devotion. And then they divided into 8 parts and gave them to kings who went, took the parts to their own capital cities and again made memorial mounds. 2 parts it was called. And then other monks took over the monasteries and the movement went on. Similarly with Islam, after Muhammad, then Abu Bakr, who died after 2 years and was succeeded by Umar, the second caliph, and then Uthman, the third caliph. Finally in 656, Ali became the 4th caliph. What are we seeing? The main founder dying and somebody else taking over. You die, somebody else takes over. And when you die, somebody else takes over. In Judaism, similarly, after the death of Moses, it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua. Okay, Moses, now your time is up. Lay down. Joshua, now you take over. The leadership was passed on to Joshua. When you come to Jesus, he's saying, I'm still there. Whoa. Now, can you see the difference? You go, you sit down, and your job is done, somebody else. But when they killed him, he comes up and says, no, I'm still around. And I will be with you till the end. In fact, I am he who lives and was dead, and I am alive forevermore. I have the keys of Hades and death. If you're an inquirer, the first thing you will say, what nonsense. See, I'm a physician. I've worked in the emergency room. And they'll bring in those ambulances with all their sirens and lights and everything. And then you take them quickly and get something done. And sometimes when they come, after you have examined, you have to look at the family and shake your head and say, he's gone. Can't do anything. He died before coming here. DOA, we call it. Dead on arrival. I cannot do anything about it. You know what I've never done? I have never said, okay, he's gone now. I can't do anything about it. But can you come back tomorrow or next week and he'll be here? Tell me, who will say that? How nasty to say that? How horrible to say that? How actually unestablished, there's no basis to say that at all. And so now you come bring a report that this man died for 3 days and then after that he rose up? Wow, who's going to believe that? Is it believable or unbelievable to an inquirer? Unbelievable. How can anyone believe this kind of a story? So what do we place that? Like a myth, we're going to just dump it into the trash can. But wait a minute. I would have dumped it there. But it is written in the best attested historical piece of literature. So now my inclination is to dismiss it like a myth. But I already found that this is the best attested historical piece of literature. I can dismiss it, but only on one count. If I give a good historical reason that it did not happen, then I can dismiss it. But until such time, I have to, hey, I can't believe it, I can't throw it out. Stuck, just like the first one. Can't believe he's the Son of God, can't even throw it out that he's the Son of God. So I have to examine this. So I had to examine it. Remember what we said an inquirer does? He doesn't blindly swallow. He does not even dismiss. See, the tendency in this case is to dismiss. But here's what we come to now. Here we come to the sharp focus of the first principle we mentioned earlier, that the belief and the doctrine in actuality are based on the story. If the story is credible, the doctrine and its religion has a base and then becomes believable. So number 10 question really is, can the story of the resurrection be established to any reasonable degree as a real physical event? 2,000 years later, can we do it? Or can we just count it as a myth? That somebody wrote it out and fooled the public. That's the question. See, the meaning of the resurrection is a religious thing. It is a Christian thing. It's a philosophical thing. It's a metaphysical thing. But whether it happened or not has nothing to do with the religion. It has to do with history. In other words, that's what Wolfhard Pannenberg said. Whether the resurrection of Jesus took place or not is a historical question, not religious at all. We're just asking, did it take place? And so the question has to be decided on the level of historical argument, not belief and what you like and don't like. The question really to anyone who's doing inquiry is, did it happen or not? Because why are we asking that? Because the doctrine is based on the story. It's either the greatest miracle or the greatest delusion, which history records. There's nothing in between. If you say, window, I don't want to look at your face anymore. It is one or the other. So I'm asking, I'm here 2,000 years later. How can I check what happened there? And then I read this statement by Wilbur Smith. Let it be simply said that we know more about the details of the hours immediately before and the actual death of Jesus than we know about the death of any other one man in all the ancient world. Wow. Nobody said wow, only I said wow. You know. Look, in the ancient world there were kings, there were emperors, there were military generals who died than we know of the burial of any single character in all of ancient history. In other words, there are some details there, so I said, I will look at the details. If these disciples are bluffing me, I'll catch them at some point. Yep, because that is Aristotle's dictum. It starts off with saying, give them the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt is to be given to the document, not arrogated by the critic. Why? Because the critic was not there. In a court of law, it's always innocent until proved guilty. You don't start by saying guilty and prove your innocence. No, it is innocent until proved guilty. In fact, John Montgomery says this, one must listen to the claims of the document under analysis and not assume fraud or error unless the author disqualifies himself by contradictions or known factual inaccuracies. So you have a chance of throwing it out. Not first, check it out. If it stands scrutiny, then well, give it the credit. If it does not, and it has all these funny little twists and turns that can't be established at all, then it has to be tossed out. So the question now for an inquirer, like you and me, is that story on its face value believable or not? And my first thing was, it's not believable. But something happened. So what could the correct story be? Why is it unbelievable? Because it strains my sense of reasoning, my rational thought. It's straining it. So I am... Go ahead. If the story is said to be unbelievable, which it is, what could the correct story be? Because something happened. So somebody has to tell me another story. And if you want to correct this story, then your correction should fit in with the rest of the story. It should not strain my sense of reasoning, otherwise what have you done more? That is already straining my sense of reasoning. You're going to bring me another theory that he strains it again, then I've only jumped from the frying pan into the fire, nothing else. So if you want to change it, you have to give me a real good story. So here is how we're going to look at it. If the story is not true, what could the other alternatives be? Do you know people have tried to say that could not be true. Something else happened. And then when you look at all those theories, they can be boiled down to two basic theories. A, he did not die, he only fainted. In other words, on the cross there was a whole lot of loss of blood, loss of fluids, BP came down, fainted. People thought he was dead, and they put him in the tomb. Do you think that's a reasonable explanation? Of course it is. They don't laugh. It's a very reasonable explanation. They got fooled. They thought, hey, have you ever seen anybody die on the cross? It's a horrible death. When you pierce them, you lose blood. Blood pressure will come down. You will faint first. So it's a reasonable theory. So that's the theory. It's called the swoon theory. Swooned, die. He didn't die. Then they put him into the tomb and he rose up from the tomb. Number 2 is the theft theory. He died. He did not rise. His disciples stole the body. That's why we have an empty tomb. That is the second one. We're going to look at both of them. Remember what an inquirer does? Look at them. So let's look at the first one. He did not die. We're going to look at what happened at that time. And when we see these 5 things, we're going to look at them one by one. Pilate was the governor who said he should be crucified. And after sending him to the crucifixion site, some of the disciples of Jesus said, we want his body to bury him. And the record says Pilate marveled that he was already dead. Why? Because crucifixion takes days, not hours. Average 2.5 to 3 days. And a person in history has been known to hang the 7 days and then die. So here in 6 hours you're saying he died? Naturally, Pilate would marvel, correct? So the record is giving the ring of truth. Pilate would marvel, you would marvel. So when the record says Pilate marveled, of course he would marvel. So it's showing that it probably is saying something that happened. So if Pilate marveled that he was already dead, look what he said. He summoned the centurion and asked him if he had been dead for some time. So when he found out from the centurion, then he gave the body to Joseph who was asking for it. So somebody made sure he was dead long, long before we were alive. Pilate himself made sure he was dead. How did he make sure? He asked the centurion. How did the centurion know he was dead? Because even to the centurion it's only 6 hours. So here's a story. In the writing it says this. It was coming down to the evening time and the people didn't want them to hang there that day. So they asked that their legs be broken. If their legs are broken, then they suffocate quickly. So they're breaking their legs until they came to Jesus and found he's not making any movement. He looks like he's dead. And the disciples are asking for the body. But how can he die so soon? So we're not going to give the body, which is alive. But they want the body. Pilate is saying, give them the body if the body is dead. So the centurion does the only thing he can do now. Let's make sure he's dead. So he calls a soldier with a spear. One hit. These soldiers were the best trained in the world. They were trained to fight others who are fighting them. Here's a body that's lifeless hanging there. How easy with one thrust to kill. That is the meaning of that spear. It was meant to kill. Then they will bring the body down. So the centurion made sure the body was dead. How? With a spear thrust. So if there's any life left, it's gone. Then John, who was writing the story, the disciple John, he says, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear and immediately blood and water came out. Oh, that's something unusual. We expect just blood to come out, but blood and water? So it requires a little explanation. Naturally for me, I'm a physician, so I'll say, hey, what kind of a story is that? But it has an explanation, a very basic explanation. Have you heard the expression, a broken-hearted individual? When do you say that? When they are dancing and singing, or when? When they are broken-hearted individual is when they are sad. Do you know where that expression came from? Most of us don't know, but let me tell you where it came from. In the old times before this expression was, there was something that the people noticed, and this is it. When young people were deeply in love, I mean just deeply, can't do without the other. If you see one, you know the other is within 3 feet. They go everywhere together. They are twins. Their hearts are just entwined. And then sometime through whatever reason and circumstances, they are forced to separate. Suddenly, after a few days, one of them dies. Healthy. And then when post-mortem grief, the stress caused by grief can be so strong and such a pressure in your chest that your heart muscle will rupture. Yep. You've seen people do hand wrestling. Sometimes when they're doing that, their eye will suddenly get bloodshot. What happens? The pressure in the system will break one of the blood vessels in the eye, and then the whole eye turns red. It's not painful because it's in a place that doesn't have much feeling. But the fact is, when the pressure goes up, blood vessels rupture, even the heart muscle itself can rupture. Now the heart is covered by a sac. It's called the pericardial sac. So if the heart muscle itself ruptures, then all the blood will come out and will collect in the sac. And if it collects, it will raise the pressure inside the sac. And if it raises the pressure enough, then it will squish the muscle itself and then no more pumping. Dead. Then what happens? The pericardial fluid will mix with the blood itself and the blood will partially clot. Partially clotted blood will get into 2 layers. The clotted part will come down and leave the upper part completely clear. It's called the serum. Serum is clear. So the spear could have struck at the level where the clotted blood was down here and the serum was there. You could have had 2 streams coming out. But 2 things are required. Number 1, the blood should stop flowing because flowing blood cannot separate out. Number 2, it should stop for some time. Look at what Pilate had asked. Summoning the centurion, he had asked him if he had been dead for some time. And that's actually what we see. Because when blood and water comes out, the blood had stopped flowing. It had stopped flowing for some time. And that is why we get these 2 layers. And John was not a doctor, so he said water. It was supposed to be serum. It's clear, so he called it water. But if you see blood, red and clear thing coming out, that blood had stopped flowing. So today, 2,000 years later, a physician can look at that and say, the blood has stopped flowing. If the blood has stopped flowing, he's dead. Number 4. So the theory is that he fainted and was put in the tomb, but how did he get out of the tomb? If he was put there with a stone, how did he get out? How did he unwrap himself? Grave clothes were wound like this. So how would he have unwrapped himself? How would he have found the door in the darkness? How would he have identified the seal which is on the outside and broken the seal which is on the outside? That's what the story says. How would he have rolled away the stone? It's called the golel in Aramaic. Aramaic is the language. Golel means big stone, requiring at least 3 people to move. In fact, some golels require 15 people to move. And here this man is not even one, he's actually half a man because he's been beaten so badly. His hands have been pierced and feet have been pierced. How could he have rolled away a golel? Now you're making another theory which is hard for me to believe. How did he do it so silently that nobody heard? Did he have a lot of grease and oil put there so that nobody heard it? It's rock. It would have made a grinding sound if he had moved it just a little bit. And then when all the soldiers closing their eyes, looking their way at the same time when he had to get out, can you see what we're trying to do? You're making a theory that is harder to believe. All these things put together. And then if he really got out, he couldn't run because he was so wounded. All he would have done is crawled away. So no soldier saw him and said, where are you going? Get inside there again. Nobody chased him at all. Can you see what the story now, we're having a hard time with this extra story. Number 5. If lots of people tell you something, it has a little ring of truth to it. So Pilate was convinced Jesus was dead. How was he convinced? He asked the centurion. Centurion was convinced. He made sure he was dead. These were enemies of Jesus. But the friends of Jesus also thought he was dead. Way back then. How do we know? They brought embalming material. You never embalm a live body. Because if the material is so toxic that if it is alive, it will die. You never put embalming material on a live body. They brought 100 pounds of embalming material because they themselves believed him to be dead. So if the enemies of Jesus and the friends of Jesus thought he was dead, what are we today saying he was alive? Therefore, the theory that he was dead that he was not dead doesn't stand to reason. We have no reasonable grounds today to dispute the point. Therefore, we may safely deduce that Jesus was really and truly dead. So that was one side of the alternate proposition. The other side is the body was stolen. He actually died. Yeah, he died. We agree. But he didn't rise because the disciples came and stole him. So we're going to look at that story as well. Really? Here's what the soldiers came and said. His disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. Now, if you read that sentence itself, you know it's false. Why? Because you cannot be awake and asleep at the same time. If you were asleep, how do you know the disciples came? The story just is crumbling, right? And that's internally inconsistent. He stole, I was sleeping and he stole my wallet. Hey, how do you know he stole? You can say it was stolen, but not he stole. And here they're saying they stole. Internally inconsistent. Externally, you were the guards. You had the swords and the spears and the shields. And you allowed the disciples to steal? So that itself, again, you reach an inconsistent report. And when you see an inconsistent report, you have to give credit where credit is due and withhold credit when it's not due, as an inquirer. Number 2, you know, the story says that when they went in, the disciples found some of the cloths were folded together. Now, when you say that they stole, you are calling the disciples criminals, right? Thieves. Okay, let's say you and I plan to steal from that house. And we are looking for a box of diamonds. And we break in through the window, nobody's at home, so we start looking for the diamonds. And pull out this drawer and look at this safe and under the bed and everywhere, helter-skelter, and finally found the box of diamonds. Hey, we found it. Let's go. And I say, oh, wait a minute. Before we go, let's fold some clothes. Thieves don't make good domestic helpers. They don't fold clothes. So if you found folded clothes there, doesn't look like a theft scene. That's it. That's what we are saying. Folded clothes? No, sir. Clothes thrown helter-skelter? Yes. Folded? No. Number 3. The record says that when people looked inside, they found all the cloths inside there. If that's the case, then we are saying that the disciples came and took a naked body out. Woo-hoo. That's a different story. Look, if you and I were thieves and we meant to steal that body, it is wrapped for you. Pick it and run. Why are you sitting there unwrapping it? There is no explanation for unwrapping. Because it's packed for you. Just pick it and bolt. The soldiers are right there. Why are you sitting and unwrapping? There is no explanation for that, number 1. Number 2, what is the intent? You as a disciple saw that the ladies had very tenderly wrapped and put some nice perfume there. What are you trying to do unwrapping it? In other words, the most honorable things were done for the body. Why were criminals crucified naked in the times of Rome? To heap on them the maximum shame. That is the reason why. So our theory is now saying that these doting disciples of Jesus stripped him of his clothes and brought out a naked body to shame him? No, sir. No follower of a revered guru or a rabbi in the East will ever even hint of exposing the nakedness of his master. That would be unthinkable. And I come from the East. I know what it is like to have a guru, and I know how shishyas follow their guru. No shishya or follower ever take away the clothes of his master and expose his nakedness. He would rather die than do that. Therefore, if you say that they did it, I am saying you have brought a psychological hurdle that cannot be crossed in the East. No, sir. Your theory is wrong. Entry into the tomb, just like Jesus coming out, how did they get inside? There is no convincing practical method of entry by the disciples into the tomb. Nobody has ever described it. The guards were stationed there for only one purpose written in the record: prevent theft. In those days, guards didn't guard tombs. This was very specific. The guard was there for the specific reason, don't let anybody steal. And therefore, if we say it was stolen, then you have to describe a method of how the disciples got inside there. And there is no method ever that has been described. No plausible explanation. Now we're calling them thieves. Anytime you state a crime and you want to take them to court, you have to state a motive. A crime without a motive is very difficult to prove. You must show a motive. Why did you beat him up? Oh, well, because he stole my stuff. Okay, God, you got a motive. But if they say you stole and no motive, then you say, the question is, did you steal at all? Any crime must first have a basic motive, otherwise the accusation itself is always suspect. Here we are saying that they stole the body. What is the motive? When you look at the story, they had no motive at all. They were scared. When he was alive, they ran from him. When he was dead, they'll be so brave. Yeah, that's the story. They ran when he was alive. The disciples had no motive for stealing the body. They had not anticipated the resurrection. If they had anticipated, they would not have fled or denied him. The theft story does not stand up to scrutiny. In other words, non-miraculous explanations of what happened at the empty tomb have to face a cruel choice. Either they have to rewrite history to suit themselves, or they have to accept the fact that they are not consistent with present evidence. With the evidence there is no other story that seems to fit. So now we go to the other side. If the story might be true, are there any evidences for it that we can look at and reasonably weigh out 2,000 years later? Stretch out and take a deep breath. So we have looked at if the story is not true, what could the correct story be? And we looked at the two main alternative theories, and they're not really convincing. So now we're going to look at the other side. If the story is really true, is there anything that we could call as evidence that something happened? There are three types. We'll look at them one after the other. The after effects. Two of them, changes in the disciples and the fact of the Christian church. The change in the disciples, perhaps the transformation of the disciples of Jesus is the greatest evidence of all for the resurrection. A little band of defeated cowards cowering in an upper room one day and a few days later transformed into a company that no persecution could silence. What made the change? They were willing to face arrest and imprisonment, beatings, and horrible deaths, and not one of them ever recanted of his belief that Christ had risen. What made the change? Think of the psychological absurdity of attempting to attribute this dramatic change to nothing more convincing than a miserable fabrication that they were trying to foist upon the world that they stole. That simply wouldn't make sense. Why? Because you would never do that. Think. Somebody died, you'll go around, you know he's dead, so you go around saying he's alive. Which of us could do that? So we both laid our uncle to rest day before yesterday. We put him in the grave. And the next day I come and tell you, hey, he's not down there. He's in the next room. He wants to talk to you. Boy, that's spooky. You won't even want to go to the next room. Because that's not the way we deal. When they're dead, they're dead. We don't tell the people that, people just rose up. And especially if we know that we had buried him. That's the point. So suppose we were the disciples and we buried Jesus in Peter's backyard. Which of us will stand up and go around telling he's alive? So let's imagine that. So we stand in a circle and we say, hey, we got to tell the whole world he's alive. Alive? We put him down there. No, tell them that he's alive. Really? Okay. Really tell them. Yep. Tell everyone he's alive. But the Jewish people will not like it. They get mad and angry, still keep on telling. They'll spit at you, or still keep on telling. They'll slap you, still keep on telling. They'll put you in jail. We're supposed to make a pact here. Keep on telling that he's alive. We know that he was buried then, but we gotta tell everyone he's alive. But then they'll finally, after jail, they'll put us to death. Yeah, you still keep on saying it until death. But then what is it for me? Nothing, just die. How much sense does that make? Just go tell everyone? Psychologically absurd. Something happened. So the transformation of these disciples who was running scared just the other night, and then suddenly says, we'll face the whole world. And they do it. What made the change? That's a question. And then the presence of the Christian church. You see, it started when you go back from today, so many people in the Christian church, and go back, right to the end. You come to the disciples. And the disciples were first 12, and then one left them. And so they said, let's make it 12 again. And so in deciding who the 12th one would be, they said, we have two criteria. All these men, of all these men who have accompanied us all the time that the Lord Jesus went in and out among us, beginning from the baptism of John to that day when he was taken up from us, one of these, now they're choosing the number 12 to make up 12. So this 12th one of these two or three or whoever they are, must become witness with us of what? His resurrection. You want to talk about how nice Jesus was? That club. You want to talk about his great teachings? That club. You want to talk about his miracles that he made on this earth and he indulged in on this earth? That club. This club has only two criteria. You should have been there from the beginning till the end, number one. And number two, you should swear to the fact that you saw him alive. That is the start of the Christian church. Only these two criteria. You should have been there and you should bear witness of the resurrection. You see, we think of religions coming out as teachings. This was not a teaching. This was like a trumpet call. Come, right in Jerusalem. Come. See a person who was once done to death, but who is alive because I saw him alive. And we better listen to him because nobody else has come back from the dead. So if he has indulged in such a supernatural act and he predicted it, then his teachings must have that same credibility. That is the start of the Christian church. Christianity stands or falls with the truth of the resurrection. If you disprove it, you have disposed of Christianity. The resurrection gave significance to all that they did. Now we see the question that I had asked when he died. How can there be Christianity after that kind of a death? There can be, because there was a resurrection. If there was no resurrection, there would be no Christianity. The institution of the Christian church is a historical phenomenon till today. And it can be explained on only one factor, that somebody died and rose up from the dead. Without that, there is nothing known as Christianity. Jesus died as a criminal condemned by the highest religious authority, the Sanhedrin. The highest civil authority, Rome. The greatest moral authority described in the Torah, the Lord himself, God himself, Yahweh God. He died under the curse of all these three. The cause of the origin and rise of Christianity must be able to account for and overcome all these three condemnations. Only a report of a true resurrection can account for all three. Think. Any other report will say, hey, how to follow him? He was condemned by the Sanhedrin. But his first followers were Jews. That means they were able to go against the Sanhedrin. How? Because something happened that was bigger than the Sanhedrin. How did the Roman citizens come to follow Jesus? Their own government, the highest civil authority in the world at that time, had put him to death as a criminal. Then how can a Roman follow him? Because something happened that was bigger than Rome. That is why they were able to say, okay, Rome, you can go. I've got something better and bigger. You see, if you are going to give an explanation, then it must sound like it's a reason. And there is a reason for the Christian church. It's huge. No other reason can account for it. Number two was eyewitnesses. Those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses. Number two, but were eyewitness of his majesty. Number three, he who has seen has testified. And the next sentence is amazing. That which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon and our hands have handled. That is what we are writing down. Not what somebody else said 200 years ago. No, we saw, we touched. The very kind of evidence which modern science and even psychologists are so insistent upon for determining the reality of any object under consideration is the kind of evidence that we have presented to us in the Gospels regarding the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, namely, the things that are seen with the human eye, touched with the human hand, and heard by the human ear. This is what we call empirical evidence in a court of law. We have empirical evidence written down for his resurrection. Number three, look, there is no other religious writing that was ever written down by eyewitnesses. This is the only religious writing ever written down by eyewitnesses. And on the most significant story, all of them say we saw. That's what we are writing down, what we saw. Number three, the first one is the transformation of the disciples. Secondly, the fact that not only were they transformed, they actually saw. And they wrote eyewitness accounts. In fact, one of them said there was one time when 500 people saw him at the same time. Number three is what is known as the deathbed confession. In Old English, we would call it dying declaration. You declare something at the point of death. That is understood by the court systems as being most probably the truth of the matter. In other words, at the point of death, very few people tell lies when they know they're going to die. So we put the gun to the head and say, okay, tell the truth, I'm going to shoot you down. Or put them in jail and after 10 years you're going to die, so we're going to hang you on the gallows. Now can you tell the truth actually what happened? Most criminals will soften up and tell the truth. At the point of death, nobody likes to face their own record in their own minds with a lie at the point of death. And that's why the judicial system most likely acknowledges that a deathbed confession is a very strong evidence. So if one deathbed confession says this and another deathbed confession says the same thing, strong. If the third deathbed confession says the same thing, then there is hardly a jury in the world that will overturn 3 deathbed confessions. A deathbed confession is powerful. If it is written down, it would amount to a sworn affidavit. If 2 or 3 such confessions can be found, they would amount to nearly unassailable testimony. Few judges or juries in the world would overturn multiple deathbed confessions stating the same detail. So we have 3, 4, how many do we have? Peter was crucified upside down. James was stoned to death. Matthew was killed by the sword. James, son of Alphaeus, was crucified. James, the son of Zebedee, was killed by the sword. Thaddeus was shot through with arrows. Bartholomew was crucified. Andrew was crucified. Philip was crucified. Simon the Zealot was crucified. Thomas was killed with a spear, and Paul was beheaded. And not a single one ever said he did not rise. At the point of death, they said he rose. That's a deathbed confession. We'll beat you up. He rose. We'll spit on your face. He rose. We'll put you in jail. He rose. We'll kill you. He rose. I can't go against my own conscience. I saw him. I touched him. I heard his words. How can I deny the fact that he rose? You can kill me if you want. In fact, you can even have a little conversation that you can imagine. Here's an imaginary conversation between somebody who is following Jesus, one of the disciples, and the soldier who comes to kill him. Because the judge has said they have to be killed. They are behaving in a way that is inconsistent with the Roman government. Kill them. So here he comes to kill. Just before you kill, the disciple says, wait a minute. Let me ask and tell you something. I am innocent. I really saw him. I'm not lying. I am telling you the truth. He was put in the tomb, but I saw him alive. But now you got the order to kill me. You can't do anything, you have to kill me. But I want to tell you something that maybe later on you might come to know that actually you killed an innocent man. You might come to know that actually that was the truth of the matter. You killed me, an innocent man. And when you come to that conclusion and you come to realize that, believe me, your conscience will burn. You killed an innocent man. And that burning will have no place of left for any help. Because when that burning of your conscience takes place, it will be something that you cannot heal at all. It will be something that you cannot do anything about. And when it comes to a point where you feel that you're going to just sink under the weight of the guilt in your brains, then I want you to remember one thing. I know the man who was alive. I want you to take your guilt to him. He is the only one who can forgive you. And when he forgives you, he will not only forgive you, he will clean this act this sin that you're doing, this horrible act of killing an innocent man. He will clean it up. And when he cleans it up, he will give you eternal life, because that's what he gave me. So go ahead and kill. We might meet in his kingdom. And they all died, one after another. Not a single one of them ever said, okay, don't kill me. Well, let me take you to the burial place. It is in Peter's backyard. If it was the truth that they knew that they had done that, how easy. Tell the truth and go home. Why tell a lie and die for it? You're not giving me a solid reason. So when you look at the story itself, taking all the evidence together, it is not too much to say that there is no historic incident better or more variously supported than the resurrection of Christ. By all rules of evidence, not rules of belief, not ideas of blind. Few people actually understand this. You will understand it, I'll tell you how. Go try to prove that it did not happen. There have been atheist after unbeliever, who have said, let me just settle this question of Christianity once and for all. Just prove that he never rose up from the dead. And when they start to prove, they become Christians. Why? Because the evidence is solid. On that greatest point, we are not merely asked to have faith. In its favor as living truth, there exists such overwhelming evidence, positive and negative, factual and circumstantial, that no intelligent thing, a chief justice knows something about evidence. And instead of ordinary evidence, what does he say? Overwhelming evidence. Nobody who's honest and looks at the evidence can ever say he did not rise. You have to agree to that. In fact, this is what Thomas Arnold said. Thousands and tens of thousands of persons have gone through it piece by piece as carefully as every judge summing up a most important case. I have myself done it many times over, not to persuade others, but to satisfy the inquirer, than that Christ died and rose again from the dead. Look, 2,000 years later, if you are an honest seeker, you will find enough evidence to state that this is the truth of the matter. In fact, there's one guy, his name was Arnold Toynbee. He wrote a huge set of volumes of history. He devoted 80 pages to anyone who would call themselves savior. So you say, you're savior of the world? Okay, I'll study you. Savior of the nation? Oh, I'll study you. Savior of your community? Okay, you also get into the list. Savior of your family? Okay, you also get into the list. And this is his conclusion after doing study on anyone who called themselves savior. Sorry, here it is. When we set out on this quest, we found ourselves moving in the midst of a mighty marching host. In the last stage of all, our motley host of would-be saviors, human and divine, has dwindled to a single company of none but gods. At the final ordeal of death, few, even of these would-be savior gods, have dared to put their title to the test by plunging into the icy river, meaning death. And now, as we stand and gaze with our eyes fixed upon the farther shore, a single figure rises from the flood of death and straightway fills the whole horizon. There is the Savior. The bones of Abraham, Muhammad, Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Zoroaster are still here on earth. Jesus' tomb is empty. It is a concrete, factual, empirical proof that life has hope and meaning. Love is stronger than death. Goodness and power are ultimately allies, not enemies. Life and not death wins in the end. God has touched us right here where we are and has defeated our last enemy called death. We are not cosmic orphans. A thoroughgoing scientist may doubt the story of the resurrection, but will have no grounds to deny it. And a fair inquirer will find enough evidence to make a reasonable claim that the resurrection story is true. It's the evidence from both sides of the question that compels the inquirer. From one side, in which we said, if it is not true, what could it be? We found that those things don't stand. And if it is true, what are the evidences? There is. So when we look at both, if you and I are honest inquirers, then we will have to say that long ago there was a man who said, if you ever do me to death, I will rise up again. And he went to his death, rose up again, and we have enough evidence to say today that that resurrection story is true. So now the summary of the conclusions of what we've been doing on this search. Let's stretch out. Take a deep breath and think. Like I said, when you're taking a deep breath, think about what we've said. Let's go to the summary of the conclusions of what we've been doing for the last 3 days. The New Testament is the best documented ancient writing in the world. It is solidly historical in nature. The top feature of writing is beyond human capability, like most of the others, so we gave them all high marks. Only the Bible's challenge is open and clear. That means the challenge to test it. It's called predictive prophecy. And it fulfills its own challenge impressively. There is a line that you can see of consistency in here. It is a historical piece of literature, and it challenges you to test it. The only one that tests it, the only one that is historical is challenging you to test it, and that's the only one, or one of them, that is clearly supernatural. That's a solid statement about the writing. When we shift over to the founder, Jesus dared to make the highest claim, Son of God. He did not just bring the truth the way he was, the way and the truth and the life. And Jesus is the only one in whom the theory of teaching was matched by actual practice in life, therefore the only one with the right to say, follow me. Again, a consistent line. He said he was from there. If he was from there, then he would bring the message in himself. In myself, I'm bringing the message, and the only one who lived according to that message. Real consistency. And then we come to this next three. He plunges from the highest level to the lowest level. His was not just the shortest ministry, he was the worst start in life. How can you explain anybody following him? Therefore, the 10th question. And even when you look at that point, remember what we said? If everybody is going forward and one person is going backward, which is the correct direction? Backward, because only one person is doing it. If everybody was born nice and honorable and only one was born this bad, then that's the one. If everybody had long periods of ministry and only one a short one, then that's the one. If everybody died honorable deaths and this one died the most unhonorable death, ignoble death, then that's the one. And how is it proved? By number 10. What happened after death? The only one who said, if you do me to death, I will rise up. And he rose. With that word, he has cut himself off from every competitor on earth. Not a single founder ever dared to say, I'll rise up from the dead. In fact, he's the only one who said it, and he's the only one who has shown evidence that he did it. The only one to go into the domain of death, the most feared enemy of humankind, break those bands and come back as a conqueror over death. There's only one in the history of this world, this man. So the final conclusion. Jesus and the Bible are matchless in their claims. They have the highest credibility, as we saw, by evidence. Therefore, they provide to mankind. Remember what we said, we are looking for the red marble, the only way? The only way. We weighed the evidence. And like I said earlier, if you are the jury, and if I'm the attorney, I would say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's the evidence, here's the conclusion, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pandit. I don't know about you guys, but my mind is super stretched. I think it's overstretched. I need to go home and stretch a couple of times and digest all of this. It's question and answer time. So you are welcome to present your questions, not just for this session. If you've got questions from yesterday, from last week, if you want to understand the links between all of these things, because the attorney has just closed his case, right? So you're more than welcome to take him to task on any of the arguments that he has presented. Can I see hands?
Hello, hello. Can you hear me? Thank
Yes.
you, Doc. I'm actually a lawyer by profession.
You are?
I'm a lawyer by profession.
Lawyer, yes, sir.
Yeah, I've been following your line of the vocabulary that you use in the legal field. But I'm not going to ask more about the law issues. I joined this seminar on the second day, and on the second day you alluded to the fact that on the first day you dealt with the idea of God.
On the first day?
Yeah,
Yes.
that you deliberated on the idea of God, and it came to light that it was part of the human race. Because I missed that part, would you just recap or just
Yes.
indicate to us how far back did you, if you did,
Yes.
trace the idea of God
Yes.
as part of the human race?
Yes.
Thank you.
Very well. Is your question this, that historically, do we go back to see where the idea of God came? Is that your question? Very well, yeah. It's an interesting, actually an anthropological question, because the people have wondered where it came from. So they've gone back and gone back and gone back, and we have structured writings by humans only 5,000 years. Before that, they're unstructured. Now, there's just a little picture here and a picture there. And we could even go back before 5,000, but the structured writings are 5,000 years old. In none of the generations have we seen the idea of God not present. In other words, the earliest that we can possibly go to shows that the people who were there, whoever the individuals there, they always felt there was something beyond the natural. So there's not a single generation of our race that ever had come to or started off by saying there's nothing there. Every one of them shows that they had some idea, no matter how primitive we might call them, they had some primitive idea that there was beyond the natural something known as the supernatural. They would give explanations here, there, and everywhere. However wrong they were, it was an idea suggesting that beyond what we see,